Hello, everyone. I'm just going to give it a couple minutes for people to log in, and then we'll get started.
Welcome back to another excellent Connex panel discussion. Today we are talking about prioritizing inclusivity for a more diverse, equitable culture. My name is Philip Spiro, an employee relations leader, and I'm proud to introduce our panelists here today. Dave, if you could kick us off.
Hi, everybody. My name is Dave Caffroy. I'm the VP of Human Resources for Dunn Edwards Paints. We're a architectural and industrial coatings manufacturer that operates in the southwestern U.S. with about 2,000 employees across 175 company-owned stores. Fancy way of saying we sell paint.
Awesome. I'm Michelle Burgess. I'm the Director of Inclusion and Diversity for Coca-Cola Southwest Beverages. So we'd be your local bottler, and we operate in the territory of Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, parts of Arkansas, with a corporate location headquarters in Monterrey, Mexico, expanding to Argentina, Ecuador, and Peru. So great to be here and looking forward to the conversation.
I'm Javier Evans. I'm the Chief Human Resources Officer at Webster Bank. We're a regional bank located in the Northeast, specifically in the New York area. So we provide all sorts of commercial banking products and services, and also on the consumer side, checking, savings, and all of the traditional banking products. We have about 4,200 employees. We do have a subsidiary out in Milwaukee as well, where we have about another 600 or so employees there. So glad to be here as well.
Well, we're glad to have all of you here. And Javier, we're going to start off with you with the first question. And it goes, everyone has a different experience with DEIA. What are your big takeaways or insights, and particularly the unexpected elements that have informed your approach to these programs?
Sure. So, as I think about that, right, one of the things, for me, it's always been, this isn't an HR thing, right? I see DEIB as really being, embedded in our business. So that's the approach that I've always taken. So I've worked very closely with our leadership team. Our CEO is front and center, of everything we do in terms of DEIB. And we focus, on how do we use the diversity groups that we offer. We have about 8 BRGs, and we try to use them to learn from each of those diversity groups about the specific areas that they cover, and then use that to form our business strategy around how do we attract those clients, whether it's we work with our Hispanic coalition called Amigos, and try to leverage the learnings from there to go out into our community. So for me, it's always been, start, at the top of the house, get executive buy-in. Without executive buy-in, I think these programs, will struggle. So if you can get, your CEO or your executive leadership team to understand that this isn't just, a nice to have, it's an imperative, it's a differentiator. I think that's one of the big, learnings that I've taken away, over the years.
Thank you. Michelle, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think Javier, you bring up a really good point, because when you think about DEI, it definitely means something different, really, to every organization. So I think with that, making sure that you have the leadership, buy-in, when you talk about starting, from the top. And I think that has to really expand really to each business function across the organization. And oftentimes, because it's, often looked at as our function, it's not necessarily an HR function. And it's definitely something that has to be embedded across the organization. And one of the reasons I think that you also have to separate it even from our, as a function is that a lot of things that you're trying to accomplish are coming from HR practices, and those might be some of the things that we actually have to work on changing. And so when they definitely have to be able to work together, HR, and then, have the structure, with that. But all of the activities and making everything better from the lens definitely have to span across the entire organization and have to have the leadership buy-in. I've definitely made some, mistakes to that approach, in previous lives.
Dave, same question to you.
Boy, trying to think of what I can add that Michelle and Javier haven't already said, but I think it really all depends on the context of the organization. All of our companies are different. We're in different industries. We operate in different geographic markets. And I think, I'm fortunate to have worked in a couple of different places. And recently, in the last few years, our company was acquired, and I get the pleasure of getting to work with counterparts globally from a DE&I standpoint. And it's even more eye-opening as we look across different cultures and different business environments. So I think the importance of the context from which you begin and from which you approach things can't be understated. Personally, I was an athlete all the way through high school and college. And, it was just natural that I didn't care about anything other than could my teammates do their jobs, right? They were counting on me and I was counting on them. And we didn't give a second thought to who we were or where we came from. And it was all part of who made us who we were. But the only thing that matters is that we work together cohesively. And so that's kind of I would say the underlying premise for really any business, that's got to be the goal from which you start, and then take the temperature to understand which direction and what path you head down.
Michelle, we'll start with you this time. And I'm reflecting on something you just said about making mistakes or learning moments, right? And when we think about rolling out an inclusivity strategy, it can be overwhelming. And given all the overlays of culture, change management, employee experience, what are some of those best practices for the proper sequencing and execution of these strategies? And what I love about Connex, if you're willing to share, maybe what some of those mistakes are, because we often learn from the mistakes.
Absolutely. I'll start with some of those experiences that helped shape the future. But, early on, I think depending on where the organization was, or depending on what you walk into, even, I can remember there was just so much focus, even with, employee resource groups, and ensuring that people that were underrepresented had a place they could go. They felt psychologically safe. They could engage, with one another. And what I recognized, that I walked into an organization where the employee research groups, they were amazing. And, for that, for internally, and what that meant to an employee. But later on, what I recognized was that, hey, if you're going to have some sort of movement or traction, then you need the allyship of everyone else, right? And so that's where I really started to pivot, because I realized how much time we spent in all of the employee resource groups, and then recognizing that there's a lot of intersectionality within the employee resource group. And then how do we leverage, to get to allyship and advocacy outside of it? And that's where we started changing this from, rather than activities, we started focusing on education and awareness. Because, if you think you want how, even being an athlete, Dave, I'm like you, as an athlete from, all the way even through college, that you have goals, you knew what you're going to do, and here's what we do, here's how we get there. And this is different, because the people that you need on your team aren't necessarily even aware that there's another direction that we need to go, or that it's even needed. So it definitely shaped how I did strategies, after that in the future. Was get to the organization, find out where we are, and meet people where they are. And then I could move toward elevating the awareness before I just jumped into some strategy that seemed very comfortable, familiar, and easy for me. Like, oh, this is really easy. And then you recognize that, no, it's not. You need everyone. You need that whole team. And that whole team would be the entire organization.
Awesome. Thank you, Michelle. Dave, over to you. What are some of those best practices that you've had for proper sequencing, and if you're willing to share any learning moments as well?
Sure. I think to add on to what Michelle said, as athletes and typically as leaders, we're pretty goal oriented and pretty focused on and programmatic about how we want to approach things, but we have to remember that not everybody else is, and we need to make sure that we give the guidance and direction, whether it be direct or kind of keeping them in the lanes on the bowling alley, right? But one of the things that was interesting when we set out to understand where we were, and we had folks that formed our committee, and I'm the executive coach behind the scenes, I guess you could say, was they had a lot of great ideas for what they wanted to do. And we said, great, that's good stuff, but we need to take the temperature first. And we did a little bit of research and employee survey to find out kind of the state of the union. And a lot of it, probably 80% of it, matched up with what we thought, but probably the other 20% was a little bit of a surprise. And I think that our folks that were sharp folks that comprise our committee, a lot of up and coming leaders, a lot of really good folks from all different backgrounds, they were a little bit shocked that the direction that we ended up going that made sense for the organization was, in some cases, very different from what they initially said. I think we need to do A, B, and C. So, a long way of saying, I think it's very important to have your vision for what you want to accomplish, take the temperature for what the organization looks like, feels like, and the perception today, and then base your strategies and then action steps as the last.
Have you had a different approach over the years?
It's funny, just wanted to follow up on what Dave said. I think you're absolutely right. You've got to start with understanding, where you're coming from. So like we sort of did a baseline surveys and we talked to our colleagues. The interesting thing is, you're right. We thought we were going in one direction, and based on the feedback that we got, we had to adjust. So some of the things that I was thinking about, from a best practice perspective, over the years, what I found is that you really have to embed these initiatives in everything you do. So, for us, for instance, we went out and we spoke to our colleagues about, hey, what type of benefits, do you want and you're interested in? But then what we did, we went one step further, together with the head of my benefits group. We went out and talked to each of the resource groups, the business resource groups. And we said, hey, what your constituencies, so we talked to the Webster Women's Network, and we heard from them, what are the issues that you're hearing within your group, and we started to hear, hey, what? Adoption is a big thing. Fertility is interesting. So we went back and we started to take another look at our benefit offering. So I'm using that as an example. The other piece that, for me, from a best practice portion was, communication. And again, how do we communicate the changes that we're making in the context in which you're making those changes, the why? It's very important that, our colleagues hear from our leaders. So I went back out to our leadership team early on and I said, hey, I need each one of you, tell me what groups you're most interested in. And, in typical fashion, they all said, hey, Javier, whatever you decide is good with us. And I said, no, well, if you have an affinity for one group over another, I'm happy to match you up. But, for the most part, they all sort of said, we'll trust you. So I actually sort of, went to the contrarian part of view of taking, for instance, one of our senior leaders and put him in charge of our African Heritage Group. And he looked at me and he said, you know, I'm a white male, right? And I said, yes, I absolutely. But go back to what Michelle said. There's learnings there. And I said to this leader, hey, you're going to learn, you know, what it's like, you know, to firsthand. You're going to hear what it's like to be an African American working in a big organization. And it's your opportunity for you to teach them what you've learned over the years. It has worked out well. So you have to have a little bit of courage, but also, you know, get the right leaders out there and have them sort of committed. And then in turn, they're out communicating not only with the BRG groups, but they're taking back what they're learning and talking about it in their town halls as they're building strategy for the business. So you know, so those are some, you know, some aha moments that I've learned over the years.
Javier, speaking of courage, what I'm hearing from this panel is sometimes you start in a certain direction and you get some feedback from your associates, your employees. You might have to pivot, but there's other things that come up. And I'm curious, Dave, over to you with respect to navigating the cultures, or navigating the challenges that can undermine DEIA efforts before they get off the ground to prevent them from, prevent the program from being successful. What are you doing to get ahead of that? And what happens when you get some of that resistance? What are you doing to work through that?
Sure. I'll go back to what I said about the context piece. You know, it was an eye opener when we did our initial survey. And just for a little bit of background, our company was established in 1925. So we've been around a while. Started as a family-owned company and grew and grew. And in 2017, we were acquired by a big global leader in the industry. So we're not small as it is, but we're a small part of a much bigger organization, but we still operate independently. But what we found out, and we operate from California to Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, and Texas. And so we found out that we had, I call them microcultures, right? So you had Northern California and Southern California, still West Coast in the same state, but there were some differences in Northern versus Southern, right? And then Arizona was different. New Mexico was a little bit different, right? There were some great overarching themes, but there was some disconnect here and there. And we found that a lot of the good stuff that was happening in these microcultures wasn't connected, and we just needed to do a better job of drawing those together and bringing visibility. So to Javier's point with the, kind of a contrarian or unique approach to who you put with what groups and whatnot, our survey told us that we did some things great and some other things that we could improve upon. But the good news was that we had the bones to just, refurbish the house a little bit. It's not like we were just completely failing. And so we put some things in place for better transparency, opening the window so that all could see the great things. We did a poor job of helping people in Nevada see that the operations in New Mexico and Texas operated the same way and had the great things going on, right? Interestingly enough, in working with some of the global counterparts, it was interesting to see them stumble with, they said, we need to do X. And it was in no way consistent with realistic expectations with where they were, with their business. I mean, we are a chemical manufacturer. Part of our DNA is being environmentally friendly. We need to be a good steward. We don't get involved in political things, environmental things. It makes sense for us to get involved in. So it's staying within the lanes of what makes sense, because when you go outside of the lanes of what your company's aura or persona is, I think that's when you put yourself at risk and can be, at risk of window dressing, or not intentional, but accused of window dressing or getting involved or stepping into areas that aren't your sweet spot, so to speak. So we're very big about staying within the culture and the confines of what makes sense, given our history, where we are, and what we know the flavor and temperature are today.
Javier, thoughts?
Yeah, no, I Dave, you're right. I think about our organization, right? And culture plays a huge part of everything we do. So, within that culture, we talk a lot about, getting to understand our clients, getting to understand our colleagues. So a lot of what we've done with the DEIB initiatives has been rooted in learning and education. And we've used that as the foundation to build, why are we on this journey? Why are we doing this? Why is this work important? And we sort of centered it around, hey, you know what? We do want a very collaborative environment. It's part of our culture. It's in our DNA. We all work together, and when we all come together, we get better outcomes. So for us, we've used education as a key component, and go back to what we talked a little bit earlier, Philip. When it comes to having the courage, to do certain things. One of our groups came to us, during Pride Month and said, hey, we want to have a panel discussion that talked about the history of drag. And there was a lot of debate. I even for myself, I was sort of like, hey, what do you do? Is the organization ready for this? But I sort of said to the leadership team, look, it's educating this, it's an art. It actually turned out to be one of the most attended sessions that we had. We had over 350 people, who attended, because it was from an educational point of view. The three individuals on the panel talked about the history, how they got involved. They talked about their personal journey. So I think if you go back to your culture and you root it there, I think it's the right way to approach this.
Michelle, over to you. Same question.
Yeah, I heard so many great things from Dave and Javier. When I hear the word culture, we have internally when we say culture, because our present CEO says culture. And I think that really goes back to, even just some of the landscape of really knowing what's important to your organization and what does it really mean. Dave, when we're talking about really being strategically agile, right? And that we thought something was, and now we know that we need to do something different. And for that communication piece, the language I think that we're using definitely matters. And even when we're in spaces where certain things mean things to us, we recognize that as we begin to talk across the organization and what we're communicating, our focus had to be on really the awareness and continuing to educate. And then we say, this is what DEI means to us. And when we say that, we're talking about our culture. We're talking about the experience that you're going to have as an employee from the time that you're here and our clients, customers, really the full cycle. I think as long as for us, as we continue on that journey, I think that we'll be strategically agile, we'll pivot when we need to, but really meeting the organization where the organization is and the different pockets of the organization, and taking that opportunity to leverage, what these engagement scores are really high and this turnover is really low, and what's attributing to that, and why can't we replicate that? Should we get the same thing in Oklahoma as we are in Texas? And a lot of that cross collaboration is definitely happening as well.
Thank you for that, Michelle. Javier, next question for you. And when I think about this question, I think of like a design-centric type of approach. But with respect to DEIB programming in your organization, what are you doing to understand and address the challenges faced by your most economically, socially, and politically vulnerable employees?
Sure. Great question. As I think about the program and how we've evolved, and we've been at this for over 2.5 years as a combined organization. We went through a merger about 2.5 years ago. And so both prior companies had a very robust program, so we brought it together. What we have done is we've partnered with our corporate social responsibility group, and tied again with our business leaders. So, we kind of go out into the community. We have had, a set of listening tours. We've gone out and talked to, let's call it, those local community groups, so that we can hear, what are the issues affecting the communities that we're in. Because I think some of the work that we're doing, really does tie back to what are the needs of the community, whether it's, financial literacy, how do we, go out and, some of the underserved communities and teach about banking and teach about financial literacy. So we spend a lot of time with our, as I said, with our corporate social responsibility group, understanding, what the issues are, trying to figure out, whether, we're, up in Massachusetts, whether it's, hey, we need more women, we need to support more women in minority-owned banking. So we've launched programs to address those issues. So, so that's how we do it. Again, like I said, it's a combination of going out into the community, tying it with some of our other corporate areas, but most importantly, also working very closely with the business leaders in having them understand and hear what the issues are and figuring out how to solve that. And I think we're not perfect, but I think we're doing a really great job in, going out and understanding those the various needs of the communities that we're in.
Michelle, your thoughts on this?
It just reminded me of one of the approaches that we're really looking at our people leaders across the organization, because they have a significant impact for internally on the experience that someone's going to have while they're with us. And so we've been doing everything we can when you think about all the different populations that you mentioned, and how is someone impacted economically, socially, politically, or any other way that they're vulnerable. The only way for us is to get people leaders to learn more about who they're leading. I think there was a time, I don't want to say what age or what year that was, but maybe, I don't know, might have been 90s or late 80s. But there was a time when we expected people to go to work, leave everything at the door. We probably even said it. Go to work, leave all your personal stuff at the door, and come to work. Well, people are dealing with so many things now, right? Back then, it was very transactional, and here's your check before direct deposit. Here's your check, and that was it. And I think now we're really focused on people being able to bring their whole self to work and everything that they might be experiencing for whatever it is that they're representing. And so we realize that if we continue to educate our people leaders on how to lead, how to connect, and even having those conversations to know how their teams are being impacted, then we can to taking a deeper dive so that people actually get what it is that they need, and even just that support. So spent a lot of time even on monthly people leader calls, or we had an inclusive leadership series, and our people leaders who actually volunteered to participate. We had 96% participation from it. And so we're definitely, I think, educating them on how to get to know, especially when you think about there being potentially 5 generations in the workplace as well, and then all of the diverse needs that are coming with it.
Michelle, can I ask a follow-up question? Sometimes leaders and people leaders sometimes feel like initiatives are like, oh, that's another thing. So what did you do to kind of lay the groundwork, or what did the organization do to lay the groundwork to say, no, this is actually going in furtherance of everything we're doing here?
So I think, by offering, something first as a volunteer, right? Hey, we've got 1 of 6 sessions coming up. This is a series, and we want to support you on your leadership journey. So it wasn't about the organization's initiative. It was more about elevating and supporting, our leaders, and even saying we recognize that, leading now is different. You might be challenged, and we want to help you overcome those challenges. So I think it was more about the messaging that went with that. And then now that even for then a couple of series, and then now every people leader call, monthly, this is happening where there's a topic that's related to them. It also ties into inclusion and diversity. So it's become part of the regular routine. And then even the daily culture messages, safety is important to us, as integrity. So we had daily safety messages. So now I've created a culture message. So when you get ready, there's a meeting, it always starts with safety message. Now there's a culture message. You're having, those conversations, and goes back to, if you embed it in every part of the organization, it just becomes, more about who you are versus, different initiatives. And there might be some conversations, right, when we're in our leadership meeting about which way we should go and where we need to drive and steer, but we don't have to necessarily communicate something necessarily as an initiative. We can just focus on the action. I always say diversity is what you have, inclusion is what you do. So I'm trying to be more focused on the action.
Dave, understanding your most vulnerable employees, any strategies to share?
Well, I'm going to really rock the boat here, and I'm going to say that we almost overemphasize the ridiculously oversimplified approach of inclusion fixes everything, right? So, and I guess, both have talked about the managing the people aspect of it, right? We want the best people to do the best job, regardless, all makes and models. We don't care who, come on down. We want the best people, right? And we want to bring in the best people that have a wide variety of experience and perspective that will, be accretive. Somebody has this skill set and somebody has this skill set, put them together 1 + 1 = 3. And so we really focused on what can we control within the context of work. And it's being very selective of who we bring in based on that, always adding different perspectives, making sure that we have leaders of people in leadership roles, not leaders of numbers and process. Numbers and process are important. They're there, but if I can follow them, anybody can follow them. And it's finding people that focus on the inclusivity. And there's a couple of things. I wrote down and I brought with the charter for our committee, and it's to ensure that we foster an inclusive and diverse workplace where all employees feel valued and welcomed, and where everybody has equal access to opportunities, guidance, and support. And it's that simple. Simply put, if we make it the best place to work and get out of people's way, give them the tools, then the result is, I'll brag a little bit here, but we're very fortunate. We are actually a very diverse organization. We are, by any statistical metric, we're well outside of what our industry is. And it's really with focusing again on just bringing in people and making it a great place for them to be. And that encompasses all of the human element that both Michelle and Javier have talked about. So without specific programs around, we put structure around it. We have very specific pay ranges, very metric-oriented reviews to make sure everything's very objectively based. We have a consistent hiring method that's across all departments, all organizations, so that it's consistent. And we do, pay equity audits on a regular basis to make sure that there's no gaps or anything like that. But we are just over the top on making sure that we have the right leadership people in place, and that takes care of 75%.
Dave, you kind of led us into our next question, and we'll go to Michelle on this. We think about the wheels of HR and organizational design, and a lot of it often comes down to total rewards and performance management, and really baking initiatives and who we are into the organization through those systems. So what do you do, especially in your role, because I imagine you partner with human resources. How do you partner with human resources to inform those approaches toward rewards, performance management, to ensure greater objectivity, debiasing, and equitability?
Great question. We're doing a lot, and it definitely requires a lot of interaction, really, between whether it's HR, compensation, and really aligning those policies, practices, and procedures. We're definitely started probably early on looking at data, differently. So even when you're doing, the equity, audit, and really looking at is it what's happening in a department, right? Where are we? What's happening in certain levels of titles? What's happening in the promotion practices? Who's promoting? I spent a lot of years in operations, and so I love data. Like you, Dave, loves data. And so for us, it's really about taking deeper dives into where those gaps could be. And every time we think that we've have found something, we've solved something, like what else are we looking at? What else are we, what do we need to see? And it even shows up really in our talent, our talent management reviews, or some organizations say 9 blocks, but just ensuring that even our succession planning doesn't turn into succession appointing. And what are we doing for those promotional practices? And then ensuring that, and even if you're identifying, you said, high potential, well, how did they get there? And what makes them high potential? And so I'm really trying to coach across our organization to ensure that we're always challenging, we're asking those questions across the organization to get there. What are they doing? Who else is there? What are we missing? And even when you think about training programs, and how often, at many organizations where, oh yeah, yep, Dave's great. Give something else to Dave. Yep, Javier's great. Yep, you want to go to a conference? What else do you want? Oh, you want to be on this project? Yep, fantastic. And then Philip's over there, hey, what about me? And so he's eager, but since, Dave and Javier have always been identified as high potential, then, Philip may not get what he needs. And so sometimes there's this gap between there's another way to, elevate, everyone. So really even look at some of the programs that we have or seen traditionally to say this might cause another inequity that shouldn't be there.
Wow, Michelle, I feel like you're sitting in on our conversations at work, because it almost dovetails exactly the same. It fits hand in glove. Philip, here we created a diversity, equity, belonging scorecard. So we have various metrics like you talked about, Michelle, where, on a quarterly basis, we measure, where we are, overall gender diversity, people of color, what does the new hires look like? What does promotion look like? Dave talked a little bit about pay equity. We do pay equity as well. And right now we're in the middle of doing a pay equity audit, and we brought in an outside firm to validate, where we are and what we're doing. So like you, Michelle, very data driven, and our organization likes the data. So, we're able to create scorecards for each of the lines of business, and then, the functional leaders as well. So, so we do that. And I agree with you. One of the things that, we struggle with is just what you said. It's the same set of individuals, as we look at the organization and their big projects or there's big initiatives, it's like, oh, well, we know so-and-so can do this. So, over the last year and a half, we've started to say, okay, we know that this person has delivered in the past, but here's a slate of high potential folks. All you business leaders have agreed. And so now we're starting to force the issue and say, okay, put those individuals aside. Let's now look at, this slate of individuals, so that Philip isn't overlooked, that he is, considered. And it's one of those aha moments. And our leadership team was like, wow, you're right. They're now starting to say, hey, I never really thought about so-and-so for this, for this project. So where, sometimes, as you said, you have to put it out there and you got to push it a little bit. But, it's easy to fall into that, here's what we've always done, and here are the people we always relied on. But you've got to be able to go out there and say, all right, here's the alternative, and here's some other options for you.
Michelle and Javier, thanks for calling me out. As an introvert, sometimes I do feel like I'm not advocating for myself. So thanks for seeing us introverts. Dave, we start off this question and you kind of led us into it. Is there anything else you want to add to it?
No, I think, to cap it off, in my opinion, I think HR puts the guardrails around and maybe helps move the conversation along regarding some policies or structure, but really it's got to be, acted upon by the leadership at all levels, whatever we put in place.
Oh, go ahead, Michelle.
I'm sorry. I know you just reminded me when you said, the introvert, because I just had this conversation with a team of leaders a couple of days ago. It almost takes you back to high school or college, and one or two people will raise their hand, right? And so maybe that introvert in the back, Philip, hey, I know, what about me? And then the same thing would happen where Javier's raised his hand, or, I'm saying, yeah, Dave, what were you saying? And then at some point, Philip just stops participating. And the same thing happens in our organizations, as leaders, where 2 or 3 people, what do you guys think? And so, there's Dave and Javier again. Yep. And so, yeah, many others. And so I've been trying to our leaders say, look, you know what? I've offered it information, and I think we need to make a decision. I've heard from a few of you. I'd like to hear from more of you. So let's give it the next 24 hours. And if you think of something else, call me, send me an email, send me a message on Teams. I want to be sure I hear from more of you. And that way, it's not always going to be Michelle, David, and Javier.
Right.
We can get Philip's voice, because Philip probably is the introvert. He's listening. He's taking copious notes there, or maybe doesn't run the group, or maybe we just missed him so many times he's stopped contributing. But somewhere, that's how we get more people to participate just in a basic meeting, or else it's all going to look like high school all over again. And I think about all the people I went to high school and college with, I never heard their voice. I have no idea what was important to them. I didn't learn anything much about them, what they thought about the topics. It was the 3 of us in the front. My parents told me I had to sit in the front, but doesn't mean my hand didn't get overlooked though. But it was very intentional. So I want leaders to be intentional, because that is a great way to be able to get more voices. So, and I have a daughter that's incredibly introverted, and she struggles with that. And she always said, I got to be viable without being visible. And so how I would lead.
Michelle, can I ask a follow-up question on that real quick?
Absolutely.
I think we're all in industries that, are fast-paced, right? Decisions need to be made and everything else. How do you, and this is tactical, but how do you, maybe you can take it to a strategic level, how do you get to a place where people leaders understand that, including others, because our panel discussion's about, inclusion, including others, and taking that little extra time will actually be more beneficial for the organization in the long run?
Well, even some of that goes to, can you send an agenda out? Or, how many times does that meeting come across? You get an invite, look at who's from, who's going to be on it, topic, I don't even know. What is it even about, right? And so if you can give people time to think about something, even maybe beforehand, then perhaps then you can get to the point where you can get more participation. And then I think to give the examples, even of we think about that awareness piece about why you need, the other voices. It would be something as simple as, I'm guessing that when there was an airline that used to serve peanut products, that at some point they never asked all those parents out there that suddenly had all these children that had these peanut allergies that didn't exist, many, many, many years ago, right? And so who's missing? Who is missing from that, right? So it's always about needing something else, how we're going to become innovative, because somebody else has another idea. We have people that came from other industries. You had people that maybe have been there 35, 40 years, but the person that's new might have, something else. And I think even getting teams to understand that just because Dave came up with the idea doesn't mean that he has to be the one to execute it. Maybe somebody else has another skill set. So it still goes back to the diversity of those skill sets, and I think pulling all that in together.
Thank you for that. So we're coming up on time. So we've got one last question. If you could each answer this in about 1 minute. Dave, we'll start with you. How are you ensuring continuous learning and adapting in your DEI strategies? And I'm curious, like from your own personal journey, what are you doing to continue the learning?
I think just being exposed to different groups, different environments, and from our organizational standpoint, like I mentioned earlier, we're in a good spot. We're fortunate. We'll never be perfect, but we want to maintain a lot of that good DNA. So we have spent a lot of time and effort to curate what we feel is some very appropriate training that is dispersed throughout every employee's life cycle, if you will, both general employee and then all the way into leadership regarding unconscious bias, building inclusive environments, workplace belonging, and things along those lines that we think emphasizes what's good today and reinforces so that we can keep that front of mind going forward.
Wonderful. Javier, over to you.
Sure. So, building on what Dave said, we've partnered with some learning organization and really built out some of that unconscious bias training. And we participated in a couple of studies, and now we've sort of built this and embedded it into our LMS, our learning management system, where our colleagues, can take the trainings. For the folks, on my team, I strongly encourage, the HR leadership team to go out to various conferences, to partner with their counterparts. I know I try to go out and meet with, other CHROs, not only within the banking industry, but outside of the banking industry. And that's why, Connex is such a great organization for me, because I get to, meet other CHROs or people involved in human resources that are not within banking, right? So I think it is about intentionally going out and being curious, wanting to learn what's top of mind and what's leading edge. So I'm always sort of looking and trying to understand what's happening in this space and how we can then incorporate it into everything that we do.
Michelle, over to you.
Very similar, and Javier, I've tried to be very intentional, even for myself. In Connex Partners is fantastic, and then also participating in other roundtable discussions with other leaders in different industries. What are their better practices, experiences? What have they learned? Is there new that's happening in the space for people? Are they doing flexible benefits or whatever it is that is happening? Someone goes to a conference, I want them to come back and they're sharing what they're learning as well. And then even for some things, even with LinkedIn learning, now we have people across the organization will say, oh, this was great, I learned so much from this, and then they'll share, right? And here's an opportunity, here's something that I learned. And I think it's so important that we continue, because there's so many organizations doing great things across all these different industries. And I think it's just important that we continue to share, and that as there are other barriers or obstacles to success, maybe they've already been down that road and they've already put the orange cone out there. So please tell me about the cone, what's under the cone, so I can avoid it. But I just think it's important to continue to share across industries.
Awesome. Well, this has been an incredible panel today. I have like 5 pages of notes. Some key takeaways for me include courage. Javier, thank you for giving that to us, and heard that theme throughout your conversation today, having the courage. People leaders, Dave, you're really doubling down on that and how important they are in the organization to carry the message forward and work with the the employees. And then Michelle, culture. I know it's something you guys have over there as well. So, and I could just see it and hear it in your voice and what you were describing as well, and how important that is. And the big theme I think I heard from all of you is the importance of listening, right? Javier, whether it's listening to the community or whether it's listening to your associates and being, to say it again, having the courage to maybe pivot a little bit and in some of the things that you want to try in your organization. So I think this has just been phenomenal and some great takeaways. And thank you, each and every one of you, for being here today.
And thank you, Philip, for being a great moderator.
Oh, thank you.
Great.